There's a great quote by Walter Benjamin in which he writes, "We collect books because we believe we will preserve them, when it is in fact the books that will preserve us." And it's part of his reflection on what you might call the art of collecting. He writes that in a collection, you essentially go beyond the mere accumulation of objects. Instead, the collection is like a portrait of the collector. It's a mirror, as it were, in which the collector sees himself. And when it comes to a home library, the same is true. A home library isn't simply a literary trophy case of all the books that you've already read. Instead, it's a reflection of an ever-broadening range of personal interests, obsessions, themes, which is to say, a home library isn't just about the books you've read, it's about all the books that you have yet to read. In fact, Umberto Eco once characterized this as an anti-library. He said that, strictly speaking, a collection of books should never be dead. It should never be all the things you've already read. It should always be something that is constantly growing, something that is alive, something that reflects your own expanding interests. And he himself had more than 50,000 volumes of books, more than you could really read in a lifetime. And he said that whenever he had people over, he would essentially have a little test for them. He would see how they reacted to his library. And if their first reaction was, "Wow, have you read all of these?" he knew that they weren't a real collector. Because a real collector buys more books than they could ever possibly read. In fact, Umberto Eco, like many other successful writers, was constantly being sent review copies by various publishers that he never even had the time to begin reading. Now, personally, I think it's perfectly okay to keep a small collection. I don't think you have to hoard books. In fact, I would encourage people to go to your local library and take out books and then enjoy bringing them back again. But I do think that one of the pleasures of having a small curation, a home library of sorts, is that it follows a certain taxonomy that makes sense only to the person who has collected them. As, once again, Walter Benjamin wrote, it's like you have a magic circle in which all the texts begin to speak to each other. And ultimately, that's what reading is, right? Reading is a kind of world-building exercise. You read one book, and it makes you want to read other books. It's not just the turning of the page so as to reach the end of the book. It's the turning of the page so as to begin reading other books. And to my mind, that's something that gets lost in the entire discussion on speed reading, for example. I don't think that we should read books simply for the accumulation of information. In fact, if we do so, we treat books like mere vessels of wisdom that can be somehow imbued or downloaded directly into our brains. As Susan Sontag once wrote, one of the central aspects of reading is that it gives us pleasure, or as Roland Barthes characterized it, this is the pleasure of the text. Reading isn't simply about trying to gain knowledge or absorb some type of skill. It is the pleasurable process by which we essentially allow ourselves the time to read and to think. As Schopenhauer once famously quipped, when we buy books, we would ideally also be buying the time to read them. And so perhaps especially in this digital age, a home library can also be an analog space. It can be a space in which you grant yourself the luxury, for indeed that's what it is, to take the time to read, to go over a text slowly, perhaps even using pen and paper, to relish the choice of words, the syntax, the exploration of various ideas, both in image and in form. And to my mind, that is the pleasure of reading. That is the pleasure of collecting books. As Walter Benjamin wrote, it is the books that preserve us. And I'd like to end with one of my favorite quotes from Bertolt Brecht. Bertolt Brecht writes, "In the dark times, will there be singing?" And he answers, yes, there will be singing about the dark times. And perhaps we could adapt that to say, in the dark times, will there be reading? Yes, there will be reading about the dark times. So this is a little encouragement to everybody to keep on reading, to keep on finding books that enlighten you and stimulate you, to enjoy the process of building your own home library.